was one of those mornings that felt brighter than usual. The sun was already up, warming the stadium seats and shining over the crowd that gathered early for the graduation ceremony. People carried balloons, cameras, and flowers. Families stood in line, excited to see their sons and daughters walk across that big stage. Among all the noise and laughter, an older man walked slowly toward the entrance gate. His back was straight, but his steps were careful, steady, and slightly uneven. He wore a clean jacket with Marine Corps patches stitched on the side. It was old, but he had taken good care of it. In his right hand, he held a small cane, and in the other, a white envelope that had his son's name written neatly on it. It had been years since he last visited a place this crowded. For him, this day wasn't just another graduation ceremony. It meant everything. His son had worked hard for this moment, and the father wasn't going to miss it for anything in the world. He had planned the day carefully. He woke up before sunrise, polished his shoes, and spent a few extra minutes shining the small marine pin on his jacket. He didn't need fancy clothes or anything new. That jacket told his story better than words ever could. It carried years of memories, sacrifices, and quiet pride. When he reached the entrance, the sound of cheering students and proud parents echoed from inside. He smiled to himself, imagining his son sitting with the other graduates waiting for his name to be called. He pulled out his ticket and stepped forward, ready to walk in. But before he could move, 2 security guards blocked his way. They were large, serious-looking men dressed in black uniforms and sunglasses. One of them raised a hand and said, "Sir, we need to check your pass." The veteran nodded and handed over his invitation. The guard looked at it, then at the man's jacket, and frowned. "Do you have another ID on you?" he asked. The veteran reached into his pocket and realized he'd left his wallet in the car. He had parked far away and didn't want to make the long walk back. "I'm sorry, son," he said politely. "I must have left it in the car, but that's my name right there on the invitation. I just came to see my boy graduate." The guard exchanged a look with his partner. The second one leaned forward and said, "We can't let anyone in without proper ID. Rules are rules." The veteran tried to stay calm. "I understand that," he said softly, "but I've come a long way for this. I'm not here to cause trouble. Just let me find my seat and I'll stay out of the way." The guards didn't move. One of them shrugged. "Sorry, sir. You'll have to get your ID." The old man's heart sank. The walk back to his car would take at least 20 minutes each way. He wasn't sure he could make it in time before the ceremony started. He looked around helplessly, hoping someone would understand. People in line began to notice. Some looked curious, others sympathetic, but no one said anything. The veteran adjusted his jacket, feeling the weight of eyes on him. He wasn't embarrassed for himself, he'd been through tougher days. But he hated the idea that he might miss seeing his son walk across that stage. "I served this country for 20 years, he said quietly. "I've never had to prove who I am just to see my own kid." One of the guards gave a small sigh but didn't step aside. "I respect that, sir," he said. "But we can't make exceptions. We have to follow protocol." The veteran nodded slowly. His fingers tightened around the envelope. He didn't want to argue or make a scene. That wasn't who he was. Still deep inside, it hurt. After all he'd given and lost, he just wanted one simple thing: to watch his son's proudest moment. He tried once more, speaking gently. "Look, I don't want to cause any issues. My son's graduating today. He's sitting somewhere inside, waiting for me to be there. Can't you just—" Before he could finish, one of the guards interrupted him. "Sir, please step aside. You're holding up the line." The veteran's shoulders dropped slightly. He stepped aside as families and students passed through the gate, scanning their tickets and showing their IDs. No one paid much attention to him now. He stood off to the side, staring at the gate he couldn't cross. The sound of laughter and applause floated from inside the stadium. His throat tightened. He thought about all the nights he had stayed up writing letters to his son during deployment, telling him to stay strong, to keep working hard, to build a better life. He thought about how proud he'd been when his son told him he'd made it to college. And now, at the moment that should have been full of pride and joy, he was standing outside, being treated like a stranger. He looked down at his jacket. The patches that once filled him with pride now felt like a reminder of how invisible he'd become to the world around him. He wasn't angry, just disappointed. The kind of disappointment that comes when you realize some people will never understand what others have sacrificed for their freedom. A young woman nearby, seeing him stand there, walked up and asked softly, "Sir, are you okay?" He smiled faintly and nodded. "I'll be fine, dear. I just need a moment." She hesitated, wanting to help, but the guard's presence made her step back. She gave him a sympathetic look before walking away. Minutes passed. The veteran checked his watch. The ceremony must have started by now. He could almost hear the names being called, the cheers echoing through the stands. He imagined his son looking around, scanning the crowd, wondering where his father was. That thought alone was enough to bring tears to his eyes. He clenched his jaw, trying to hold himself together. The last thing he wanted was to cry in front of strangers. He took a deep breath and looked up at the clear blue sky. "Just a little longer," he whispered to himself. "I'll find a way in." He didn't know that his quiet struggle hadn't gone unnoticed. A few rows away, a small group of men stood together near the VIP section. They were watching him closely. The familiar Marine pin on his jacket had caught their attention. They exchanged glances, knowing, respectful glances, because they understood exactly what that man had been through. The veteran had no idea that help was already on its way. For now, he just stood there outside the gate, holding onto the envelope, refusing to give up hope. He wasn't leaving, not until he saw his son walk across that stage. The crowd inside the stadium grew louder as the announcer's voice echoed through the speakers. The graduation ceremony had started. Music played, people clapped, and the graduates sat proudly in their rows of chairs waiting for their names to be called. Outside the gate, the veteran could hear it all, the cheers, the laughter, the sound of his son's moment slipping further away. He stood quietly, still holding the envelope with his son's name written on it. His hands trembled slightly, not from weakness but from the deep ache of being shut out. Every few minutes someone new passed by and glanced at him. Some gave polite smiles, others didn't look at all. He didn't blame them. Most people were too caught up in their own happiness to notice the older man waiting just outside the fence. The two guards who had stopped him earlier were now talking among themselves. Every so often one would glance in his direction as if making sure he didn't try to sneak in. The veteran could feel their eyes on him, but he didn't move. He wasn't going to argue or cause a scene. That wasn't his way. He had learned long ago that staying calm was stronger than shouting. He thought about his son inside, how proud he must be, how nervous he probably felt. The boy had worked hard for this day, juggling part-time jobs and late-night study sessions. The father had always admired that about him, his quiet strength, his persistence. That same persistence ran in their blood. A family walked past, laughing and taking pictures. One of them accidentally bumped into the veteran's cane and quickly apologized. "It's all right," he said kindly, forcing a small smile. As they hurried off, he looked down at the scuffed mark on his shoe and sighed. It wasn't the first time he'd been misunderstood. Since leaving the service, he'd often been treated like he didn't belong anywhere. Some people looked at him with respect, others with suspicion, but never like this. Never denied entry to something so personal, so meaningful. One of the guards finally spoke again. "Sir, you still here?" he asked, sounding a bit annoyed. The veteran nodded. "Yes, I'm waiting for someone." The guard crossed his arms. "Like I said, we can't let you in without ID. You can go get it and come back." The older man looked at the long road behind him, the hot pavement stretching all the way to the parking lot. His knees already ached from the morning walk. He knew he wouldn't make it back in time. "The ceremony will be over by the time I return," he said softly. "I'll just wait here." The second guard shook his head. "You can't just stand here all day, sir. This is a restricted area." The veteran didn't argue. He simply stepped a few feet away, closer to the fence where he could see through the gaps. From there, he could catch glimpses of the stage and hear the muffled voices of the speakers. It wasn't much, but it was something. A young boy sitting on a nearby bench looked at him curiously. "Mister, are you waiting for someone?" he asked. The veteran smiled. "Yes, son. My boy's graduating today." The kid grinned. "Cool, my sister is too." Then he ran off to join his family. The veteran's smile faded slowly. He could remember when his son was that young, always running, always asking questions. Those were the years that made all the sacrifices worth it. As he stood there lost in thought, he overheard the guards talking again, but this time their tone changed. One of them chuckled under his breath. "You think he's really a Marine?" "Who knows," the other said. "A lot of people wear those jackets to get attention." "Could be anyone," the words cut deep. The veteran didn't move, but his heart sank. He didn't expect everyone to understand his past, but to hear that kind of doubt. It stung more than he wanted to admit. He'd earned every stitch on that jacket. Every patch represented nights spent away from his family, days spent in pain, and years he could never get back. He clenched his jaw and looked away, refusing to let anger take over. There was no point. He had faced worse. Still, a part of him wondered how easily people could forget what those patches meant. A few minutes later, the sound of the crowd cheering again caught his attention. Someone must have walked the stage. He leaned closer to the fence, hoping to catch a glimpse. Through the gaps, he saw rows of graduates in blue gowns waving to the audience. His chest tightened. Somewhere among them was his son. He whispered to himself, "I'm here, kid. I'm right here." Then from a distance, a deep voice called out, "Excuse me, sir. Everything all right here?" The guard straightened up quickly. A tall man in a dark suit walked toward them. He had a Marine pin on his jacket, small but unmistakable. Behind him were a few others, all standing with quiet confidence. The veteran looked up, surprised. He didn't recognize them personally, but he knew that look. The posture, the calm presence. Marines could always spot each other, even without words. One of the guards stepped forward. "Everything's fine," he said quickly. "Just standard procedure." The man in the suit gave him a steady look. "Standard procedure for what?" he asked. His tone was calm, but there was authority in it. The guards hesitated. "He doesn't have an ID, sir." "We can't let him in." The Marine turned toward the veteran, his eyes softening. "Sir, may I ask, are you here for the graduation?" The veteran nodded. "Yes, my son's graduating today. I had my invitation, but I forgot my ID in the car." The Marine studied him for a moment, then noticed the patches on his jacket. Without hesitation, he straightened his back and gave a small salute. "You served?" he said quietly. The older man returned the nod. "Yes, I did. Long time ago." Something shifted in the air. The other Marines behind the man stepped closer, their faces respectful. One of them spoke up. "Then he's coming in with us." The guards looked uneasy. "We can't just—" But before they could finish, the Marine held up his hand. "You can check the guest list again. His name will be there." "We'll wait." The veteran stood still, unsure what to say. For the first time all day, someone was standing up for him, someone who understood. As one of the guards reluctantly checked the list, the other Marines exchanged quiet words. They didn't raise their voices or argue. They didn't have to. Their calm confidence said enough. The veteran watched them closely. A lump formed in his throat. He hadn't expected anyone to help him. In his mind, the world had moved on. But seeing these men step forward reminded him that brotherhood never truly fades. After a few moments, the guard looked up from the list and swallowed hard. He's on it," he said quietly. The Marine gave a firm nod. "Then there's no problem here." He turned to the veteran and offered his hand. "Sir, let us escort you inside." For the first time that day, the veteran smiled, a real, genuine smile. The weight in his chest lifted slightly. As they walked toward the entrance together, the people nearby watched in silence. The guard stepped aside without another word. The ceremony was still going on, and though he had missed the beginning, the veteran felt a sense of peace wash over him. He was finally going to see his son. What he didn't know yet was that this moment, this small act of respect, was about to change everything that day. As the veteran slowly walked through the stadium entrance, the air around him felt lighter. The crowd's cheers were now clear and alive, echoing across the open field. The Marines who had stepped in beside him walked with quiet confidence, making sure he didn't feel alone. He didn't ask for their help, but they gave it anyway, not out of duty, but out of respect. The guard stood off to the side, silent now. One of them shifted uncomfortably, realizing how harsh they had been earlier. But the veteran didn't look back. He wasn't thinking about the guards anymore. His mind was already focused on what lay ahead, seeing his son in that blue graduation gown, standing proud among hundreds of students. The Marines led him through a side path that opened into the stands. The sunlight was bright and the field stretched wide below. Rows of families filled the seats, waving and shouting when they spotted their loved ones. The veteran paused for a moment, taking it all in. It had been a long time since he'd felt part of a moment like this. Something joyful, something full of hope. "Let's find you a good spot," one of the Marines said kindly. The veteran nodded, still trying to hide the emotion building up inside him. His voice trembled slightly as he replied, "Thank you, son." "You didn't have to do this," the Marine smiled. "Sir, once a Marine, always a Marine. We take care of our own." Those words hit deep. The older man felt a warmth in his chest he hadn't felt in years. He had spent so long thinking that his service was just a memory, something people no longer cared about. But at that moment, surrounded by men who understood what he'd been through, he realized that some bonds never fade, no matter how much time passes. They found a seat close to the front, just a few rows away from the stage. The veteran sat down carefully, resting his cane by his side. From where he sat, he could see the rows of graduates in their caps and gowns. The sea of blue shimmered under the sunlight. He scanned the crowd, searching for a familiar face. The Marine stood near him quietly, keeping an eye on the ceremony. The people around them whispered softly, curious about what had just happened. A few had seen the confrontation at the gate. Now, seeing the veteran escorted in with such honor, their expressions softened. One woman leaned over and whispered, "He must be someone special." The veteran didn't hear her. His attention was fixed on the stage where a group of students lined up to receive their diplomas. He leaned forward, heart pounding slightly. He wanted to see his son's face, to see that proud smile he'd imagined all morning. While the announcer continued reading names, one of the Marines leaned down and said, "Sir, if you don't mind me asking, how long did you serve?" The older man smiled faintly. 20 years, he said. "Most of it overseas. I came home when my boy was still little." "That's a long time," the Marine replied respectfully. "You must be proud of him." "I am," the veteran said softly. "He worked hard for this. There were times I couldn't be there for him. Now I just want him to look up and know his old man is watching." The Marine nodded, understanding completely. For men like them, family moments were treasures, often missed, sometimes delayed, but always cherished. As the ceremony went on, the veteran listened to the speeches. Some were long, some emotional, but all filled with hope. He didn't mind. Every word felt like a celebration of everything his son had achieved. But in the middle of the joy, his thoughts drifted for a moment to the morning's events. The way those guards had doubted him, the words they'd said about his jacket. It still lingered faintly in the back of his mind. Yet now, surrounded by people who respected him, it didn't sting as much. It almost felt like that moment had led to this one, a reminder that dignity can be lost for a moment, but never taken away if you carry yourself with pride. A few minutes later, a man on stage adjusted the microphone and began to read the next set of names. The veteran leaned forward, his heart beating faster. He knew his son's name was coming soon. Down on the field, the line of graduates moved slowly. Each one walked up, shook hands, and posed for a quick photo. The crowd cheered for every single one. But the veteran didn't cheer, not yet. He was waiting for his turn to feel that rush, that burst of pride he'd been holding in for so long. And then he heard it. His son's name announced clearly over the speakers. Time seemed to pause for a moment. The veteran's breath caught in his throat. On the stage, a young man stepped forward, tall and confident. His gown fluttered slightly in the breeze. The Marine Corps emblem pin glimmered on his chest, a small tribute to the father who had inspired him all his life. The veteran stood up slowly, gripping his cane with one hand and shading his eyes with the other. The young man looked up into the stands as if searching for someone. Their eyes met. In that instant, nothing else existed. Not the crowd, not the speeches, not the noise. Just a father and a son locking eyes across the distance. The son smiled, wide, bright, full of emotion. The father's heart swelled with pride, and before he knew it, tears were sliding down his cheeks. The Marines beside him noticed and gave a respectful nod. They didn't say a word. They didn't have to. They understood what that look meant, the silent exchange between two generations of strength and sacrifice. When the applause filled the air, the veteran clapped too, his hands trembling slightly but full of pride. "That's my boy," he whispered under his breath. "That's my son." The ceremony went on, but for him that was the moment that mattered most. He had made it, not just through the gate but through everything life had thrown at him. After the applause settled, the Marine who had escorted him in leaned close and said quietly, "Sir, I think your son's looking for you." The veteran smiled. "He'll find me," he said softly. "He always does." He sat back, taking a deep breath. The sound of laughter and joy filled the air again. For once he didn't feel like an outsider. He felt part of something, a proud father, a Marine, a man who had fought his battles and finally got to witness one of life's sweetest victories. Behind him, the crowd slowly started to settle, but the moment stayed alive inside him. He could still see his son's smile in his mind, and it was enough to make all the struggle of the morning fade away. For the first time in a long time, he felt peace. He didn't know that the story wasn't over yet. Because soon, after the ceremony ended, something would happen that would make this day unforgettable, not just for him, but for everyone who had seen it. When the ceremony came to an end, the music started playing again. Families rushed down the steps, waving and calling out to the new graduates. The air was filled with laughter, cheers, and flashes from cameras. It was a beautiful sight, a mix of pride, happiness, and relief. The veteran stayed seated for a few more moments, letting the crowd move around him. He watched the sea of graduates hugging their friends, tossing their caps in the air and posing for photos. It reminded him of another kind of celebration, the kind that came after long, hard days in service when his team made it home safely. That same feeling of victory was in the air now. He picked up his cane and carefully stood up. The Marines who had helped him earlier were still nearby. One of them smiled and asked, "Would you like us to help you find your son, sir?" The veteran shook his head with a gentle smile. "No, thank you. You've already done more than enough." The Marine gave a respectful nod. "It was an honor, sir." As the veteran made his way down the steps, people recognized him from earlier. Some smiled, others stepped aside politely to let him pass. No one knew his name, but something about his quiet dignity made people stop and look. He finally reached the open field where the graduates were gathering. The sun was starting to dip lower, painting the sky with soft shades of orange and gold. He scanned the crowd, searching for his son among all the blue gowns. Then, through the noise and movement, he saw him, tall, standing with his cap in his hand, talking to a group of friends. The veteran's heart filled with pride all over again. He took a few careful steps forward, his eyes locked on his son. For a moment, he just watched. His boy laughed, his shoulders relaxed, his future wide open ahead of him. The father smiled softly, feeling a tear slide down his cheek. All the hardships, all the years apart, all the pain, it suddenly felt worth it. He called out, his voice cracking slightly. "Son!" The young man turned immediately. When he saw his father standing there, his eyes widened in disbelief, then filled with emotion. "Dad!" he shouted, running toward him. They met halfway and embraced tightly. It wasn't just a hug. It was years of love, pride, and understanding wrapped together in one moment. The young man held his father firmly, as if afraid to let go. "You made it," he said softly, pulling back to look at him. The veteran smiled through his tears. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." The son noticed his father's jacket, the same Marine patches he had seen all his life. "I wore this for you," he said, pointing to the small Marine pin on his gown. "I wanted to make you proud." "You already have," his father replied quietly. "You always have." The two stood there for a long moment, lost in the crowd but completely in their own world. Around them, people were celebrating, taking photos, calling out names, but nothing else mattered. Then one of the Marines who had escorted the veteran earlier walked over. He gave a polite salute to the young graduate and said, "Congratulations, son. You've got a good man for a father." The son smiled proudly. "Yes, sir, I do." The Marine nodded and looked at the veteran. "Sir, it was an honor to stand with you today." The veteran returned the salute. "Thank you, son. You reminded me that there's still honor in this world." As the Marine walked away, the young man looked confused. "What happened?" he asked. The father hesitated, then chuckled softly. "Let's just say I had a little trouble at the gate. But your brothers in the Corps made sure I didn't miss your big moment." The son's expression changed from confusion to disbelief. "They stopped you?" The veteran shook his head. "Doesn't matter now. What matters is that I'm here and I saw you." The son frowned slightly. "It does matter. They shouldn't have treated you like that." The father placed a hand on his shoulder. "Don't waste your energy on anger. I've lived long enough to know some people just don't understand. But when the right people step up, that's what counts." The son nodded slowly, taking in his father's words. "You're right, Dad." They walked together toward the photo area where families were taking pictures. As they moved, other parents and students noticed the Marine jacket. A few came over to shake the veteran's hand, thanking him quietly for his service. He accepted each handshake with humility, always replying with the same words, "Just doing my duty." At one point, a local photographer approached. "Sir, would you mind if we took a photo of you and your son for the university page?" "It's a beautiful moment." The veteran hesitated, not one for attention, but his son nodded eagerly. "Please, Dad, let's do it." They stood together, father and son, side by side. The son placed his arm around his father's shoulders, holding him close. The camera clicked, capturing not just a picture but a story, one of love, sacrifice, and pride. As the crowd began to thin, the veteran and his son sat on a nearby bench. The sun was almost setting now, painting the field in warm gold. The son looked at his father and said quietly, "You know, I didn't always understand what you went through. But seeing how those Marines treated you today, I get it now. The bond you all share, it's something special." The father nodded. "It's not just a bond, son. It's a promise. No matter where we go or how much time passes, we look out for one another." The young man smiled, "Just like you did for me." The veteran chuckled softly. "I suppose so." They sat in silence for a while, watching families pack up and leave. The guards who had stopped him earlier stood near the exit. When they saw him again, they looked uncomfortable. The older man noticed but didn't say anything. He didn't need to. As he and his son walked toward the car, one of the guards finally stepped forward. "Sir," he said quietly, "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. We didn't mean any disrespect." The veteran paused, looked at him for a moment, then nodded. "It's all right. We all have lessons to learn." The guard seemed relieved, stepping aside as they passed. The son looked back once but said nothing. His father had already moved on, and so did he. When they reached the car, the veteran leaned against it for a moment, taking in the quiet evening air. The crowd noise had faded, replaced by the soft sound of birds and distant laughter. His son turned to him. "You know, Dad, people will talk about today. What those Marines did, and it was powerful." The veteran smiled. "Maybe. But I think they just did what any Marine would do. They saw one of their own being disrespected and did the right thing." The son nodded, his eyes full of admiration. "Still, I'm glad they did. You deserved to be there." The veteran placed a hand on his shoulder once more. "I didn't deserve anything, son. I just wanted to see you take that walk. That's all I ever wanted." They got into the car and sat quietly for a moment, watching the last rays of sunlight fade behind the stadium. It had been a long day. Emotional, unexpected, but full of meaning. As they drove away, the veteran looked out the window, his reflection catching in the glass. For the first time in a long while, he felt at peace. What he didn't know was that someone in the crowd had recorded everything, from the confrontation at the gate to the Marines stepping in. By the next morning, the video would spread across social media, and the whole country would see what true respect and brotherhood looked like. But for now, the veteran didn't care about any of that. All he cared about was that he had made it, that he had been there to see his son graduate. And that was enough. The next morning, the sun rose slowly over the quiet neighborhood. The veteran sat on his porch with a cup of coffee, the same way he did every morning. The world around him was calm, birds singing, a few cars passing by, the smell of fresh air mixing with the faint scent of coffee. It was peaceful, and he liked it that way. But that peace didn't last long. His phone started buzzing nonstop. Calls, messages, notifications, and one after another. He frowned a little, confused by the sudden noise. He wasn't someone who spent much time on the internet, but something was definitely happening. His son came running out of the house, holding his phone up with wide eyes. "Dad, you're all over the internet!" The veteran raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean, all over the internet?" His son turned the screen toward him. "Someone filmed what happened yesterday. The guards, the Marines helping you, everything. It's everywhere now. People are calling it the most powerful moment at the graduation." The veteran blinked, trying to understand. "Someone recorded that?" "Yeah," his son said, scrolling through hundreds of comments. "Look, people are talking about your calmness, about how the Marines stood by you. There are thousands of comments thanking you for your service. Reporters are even trying to reach out." The old man leaned back, letting out a soft sigh. He didn't know whether to be proud or uncomfortable. He had never liked attention, and now the whole country seemed to know his face. "I didn't do anything special," he said quietly. "Those young men just did what they thought was right." His son smiled. "Maybe so, but people needed to see that." In a world where everyone's quick to argue, they saw something real. Respect, honor, and kindness. He reminded people of what that looks like. The veteran didn't answer right away. He just looked out at the street, watching the sunlight hit the leaves. After a few seconds, he smiled faintly. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. Over the next few days, the story spread everywhere. News channels played the clip over and over. The moment the Marines walked through the crowd to stand beside the old veteran, the way the audience fell silent, the emotion in his son's hug. It wasn't just another viral video. It was something people felt in their hearts. Messages started arriving in the mail, handwritten letters from strangers, thank you notes from families, even a few from other veterans who said the story brought back memories of their own. The veteran read each one carefully, always humbled by the words, but through all the attention he stayed the same, quiet, polite, and grounded. He told his son, "Fame fades, but character stays. What matters most is how we treat people when no one's watching." One afternoon, a letter arrived from the commanding officer of a Marine base nearby. It invited him to be the guest of honor at a special ceremony. The letter said they wanted to thank him for his service and for reminding people what true dignity looks like. At first, he wasn't sure he wanted to go. He didn't like the idea of being in the spotlight. But his son convinced him. "Dad, you always told me to stand tall when something good happens. Maybe it's time you do the same." So he agreed. When the day came, they drove to the base together. As they arrived, rows of Marines stood waiting at attention. Flags waved softly in the wind. The sound of drums echoed across the courtyard. When he stepped out of the car, the young Marines saluted him all at once. The sight made his chest tighten, not out of pride, but out of deep emotion. He had stood in their place once, young and fearless. Now he saw the next generation carrying that same spirit forward. The commanding officer shook his hand firmly. "Sir, we owe you a lot more than thanks. You reminded us of who we are and what we stand for." The veteran smiled humbly. "You don't owe me anything. Just keep doing what you're doing, looking out for each other." They led him to a stage where a microphone waited. The crowd stood quietly, expecting a speech. He wasn't a man of many words, but he decided to say a few. He cleared his throat and looked at the faces before him. Young soldiers, officers, and families. "I never asked to be noticed," he began softly. "I came to watch my son graduate, that's all. But what I saw that day reminded me of something important. Respect is not given by rank or title. It's given by action. Those Marines didn't know me, but they knew what was right, and they did it without hesitation." He paused, his voice steady but full of emotion. "I hope all of you remember that. In uniform or not, we're all human. The world could use a little more understanding and a lot more courage to do what's right." When he finished, the crowd stood in silence for a moment, then burst into applause. It wasn't loud or wild. It was full of respect. Some of the younger Marines even looked emotional, wiping their eyes quietly. Later that evening, after the ceremony ended, the veteran and his son walked along the beach near the base. The sky was glowing orange and pink, waves crashing gently against the shore. His son spoke first. "Dad, I think what happened was meant to be. Maybe it wasn't just about me graduating. Maybe it was about reminding people what real honor looks like." The veteran smiled faintly. "Maybe so. Life has a funny way of teaching lessons when we least expect it." They walked in silence for a while, the cool wind brushing against their faces. Then the son asked softly, "Do you ever miss it? The service?" The veteran looked out at the water. "Every day, but not for the battles or the medals. I miss the brotherhood, the trust, knowing someone always had your back." His son nodded. "That's what those Marines showed you that day. They had your back." The veteran chuckled quietly. "Yeah, they did. And that's something I'll never forget." As the sun dipped lower, the veteran took a deep breath. He felt lighter somehow, as if the years of quiet pain had finally eased. When they reached the car, his son looked at him with pride. "You know, Dad, people online are calling you a hero." The old man smiled and shook his head. "No, son. Heroes are the ones who never made it home. I'm just lucky enough to still be here and to have you by my side." His son smiled back, eyes shining. "Well, I think you're a hero anyway." They got in the car and drove home as the sky turned dark. The world had changed around them, but their bond, their story, would stay the same. In the weeks that followed, the story continued to inspire people. Schools invited the veteran to speak, not about war, but about kindness and respect. He never gave long speeches. He just told the truth in simple words from the heart, and every time he spoke, he ended with the same message. The uniform doesn't make the man. The heart does.